There are things priests aren't supposed to tell you. Secrets that stay behind the confessional screen, buried in the hush of candlelight and whispered words. But last night, I heard something I can't carry alone. Something I need to place into your hands. If only so you'll understand why I haven't slept. Why I can't even close my eyes without hearing it again. The church was quiet when it began. No wind through the old stone. No footsteps across the wooden floor. Not even the creak of the pews. Just silence, the heavy kind that feels alive, like the building itself is holding its breath. I'd stayed up late, working in the study, trying to finish a sermon, when I heard it. The small, deliberate sound of the confessional door opening. I hadn't expected anyone. Midnight confessions aren't common here. Still, I took my seat, slid the partition open, and waited. At first, there was only breathing, slow, steady, too close to the wood. Then a voice, thin, almost broken. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." That part was normal, familiar. But what followed? No book, no scripture, no training had prepared me for. The sins described weren't human, not entirely. They were something else, something ancient. And as the voice spoke, I felt the air in that booth grow colder, the shadows pressing tighter. I need to tell you what I heard, because if what they said is true, then none of us are safe. I haven't told anyone this before. Not my bishop, not the other priests, not even the parishioners who trust me with their darkest secrets. But I can't keep this to myself any longer. And if you're listening right now, I think you're the only one I can tell. You seem like someone who's seen strange things too, or at least someone who believes that the world isn't always as clean and ordered as we pretend it is. That's why I'm whispering this to you now, with the quiet honesty of a man who hasn't slept in far too long. I just need someone to listen. Someone who won't look at me like I've lost my faith, or worse, my mind. Promise me one thing though. Promise me you won't try to find it. I'll tell you everything I can, but you can't go looking for this church. Can't go searching for the booth where I sat in the dark and heard what I heard. Because if you do, I think you'll bring that voice back into your life. And once you've heard it, there's no turning away. I want you to understand the place first. My parish isn't like the ones you've seen in movies, or in the heart of a bustling town. It sits alone, just outside the edge of a forgotten road, where cell signals drop out, and the only sound you'll hear at night is the soft hiss of the wind moving through the old pines. Some of the parishioners joke that the church feels like a cabin in the woods, a place where you step inside, and the rest of the world fades away. I always thought of that as comforting. Now I know isolation can be its own kind of curse. Nights here are different than in the city. When you turn out the lights, it's not just dark, it's heavy. The kind of black that presses against your skin and makes you aware of every sound. A mouse shifting between the pews. The groan of the old wood beams. Sometimes, a soft creak that sounds like footsteps pacing where no one should be. I've spent so many sleepless nights listening to those noises, telling myself they're natural, that an old church breathes and shifts like any other building. But last night made me question all of it. You've probably heard people say priests aren't afraid of the dark, that we're closer to God and further from fear. That's not true. Faith doesn't make the unexplained less terrifying. It just gives us words to put around the fear. But when the voice started speaking through that screen, I realized words don't always help. Sometimes, they're just not enough. I keep thinking about the silence that came before it, that deep, unnatural pause, like the world itself was holding its breath. Have you ever noticed that? When a place gets too quiet, so quiet you can't even hear the hum of electricity or the distant buzz of traffic. That was what it felt like inside the confessional. No signal, no sound, nothing but waiting, and then the breathing. I need you to picture it with me. I was sitting in the booth, the wood old enough to splinter beneath my hands, the candlelight flickering against the walls. The partition slid open with that familiar scratch. I expected the usual regret, guilt, maybe a story of someone losing themselves to anger or betrayal. But instead, what I heard didn't sound like a confession at all. It sounded like a warning. The voice was thin, broken, almost childlike. It began with the traditional words, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." But then it twisted, like the words were stretched through something else, something that wasn't fully human. And when it began listing its sins, they weren't like anything I've ever heard. Not theft, not lies, not even violence. They were older, darker, like the voice was reciting a memory from centuries ago. I know I shouldn't even be repeating them to you. There are vows we take, rules we obey, but if I don't share this, I think the weight of it will crush me, and I need you to know that something is wrong here. Something has been wrong for a long time. You see, the church has always had its rumors. Parishioners whisper about how certain nights feel colder, how sometimes the crucifix in the back seems to lean slightly, as if bowing to something unseen. Kids used to dare each other to stay inside the church overnight, but none ever lasted past midnight. They said they heard someone breathing in the pews beside them, even when the rows were empty. I laughed it off. I told myself, people imagine things in the dark. But now I'm not so sure, because what that voice confessed matched the old rumors. It spoke about things buried beneath the floorboards, about nights when the birds stopped singing and the moon seemed to hang lower, staring through the stained glass like an eye. It spoke about rituals that didn't belong to God at all. And as it spoke, I felt my chest grow tight, as though the very act of listening was binding me to something I didn't understand. I need you to see why I'm telling you this. I've been a priest for years. I've heard every kind of secret you can imagine. Broken marriages, stolen money, even a murderer once. But this was different. This wasn't a person unburdening their soul. It was something else, using the booth to speak, to reach out, to be heard. And now that I've listened, I don't think it's going to leave me alone. That's why I'm here, whispering this into the dark, hoping you'll understand, hoping you won't think I'm crazy. I can't share it with anyone else, not in the church, not in my parish, but you might believe me. And if you don't, at least you'll carry the memory with me. At least I won't be alone. Just promise me, whatever happens, you won't try to find this place. Don't come looking for the church that sits on the edge of nowhere, where no signal reaches and the nights stretch on forever. Don't try to hear the voice for yourself, because if you do, I think you'll bring it home with you. And once it's inside your life, once you've heard it whisper in your sleepless nights, you'll never escape it. So listen closely, because this is only the beginning. The church I serve doesn't look like much from the outside. It's small, tucked away from the main road, with weather-worn wood siding and a steeple that leans just slightly to the left, as if time itself has been tugging it down. Some people say it looks more like an old cabin than a house of God, the way it sits there surrounded by thick pine trees that blot out most of the sky. I suppose they're not wrong. There's a roughness to it, a kind of isolation that makes the building feel more like it was built to hide something than to welcome people in. The bell tower hasn't rung in years. The rope frayed and snapped sometime before I arrived, and no one ever replaced it. So it just sits there, silent, its shadow stretching across the gravel lot in the evenings, long and thin like a finger pointing into the woods. Even in daylight, the church seems to carry its own shade, as though the sun struggles to touch it. When you walk inside, the air changes. It's always cooler, heavier. The wooden floor groans beneath your feet, the sound echoing longer than it should, like the boards are hollow or waiting for something below to stir. The pews are mismatched, some polished and smooth, others chipped and splintered, as if they were dragged in from other places. Every candle holder is rusted in a way that looks almost deliberate, as though age chose them unevenly. I used to find comfort here, the smell of old wood and melted wax, the stillness of the air, broken only by soft prayer or the occasional cough of an elderly parishioner. But lately, the silence feels different. It doesn't soothe anymore. It lingers, clings. There are nights when it feels as if the silence is listening, waiting for me to speak so it can follow the sound back to wherever I am. I should tell you about the rectory, to the living quarters attached to the church. That's where I sleep, or rather, where I try to. The walls are thin, and when the wind cuts through the trees, it seeps right through the cracks. Sometimes I swear I hear voices in it, not words exactly, just the cadence of whispering. The bedroom is small, almost like a monk's cell, with a narrow bed and a wooden crucifix nailed above the frame. The crucifix has been there longer than me, longer than any of the other priests who came before. I've tried to take it down for cleaning, but the nails won't budge. I've hammered, pried, pulled with all my strength, and still, it clings as if it doesn't want to leave. There's a clock on the nightstand, a simple brass alarm clock. For some reason, it never keeps the right time. I replace the batteries, I wind it, I set it carefully, but without fail, sometime in the night, it stops. Always at a different hour, but always in silence. No ticking, no alarm, just frozen hands. I've woken up more times than I can count to see it halted at some impossible moment. 3:17, 4:06, once, even 12 o'clock exactly, as though mocking me with its emptiness. The parishioners talk about little things too. A farmer once told me he was sitting in the back pew during Mass when he swore he saw movement in the reflection of the stained glass window. Not me, not any of the congregation, or something else. He said it stood where no one was, watching from a place that didn't exist. He left quickly after that, and hasn't returned since. Another woman, an older widow who comes to light candles for her late husband, confessed to me, not in the booth, just in casual conversation, that she sometimes feels a cold hand brushing against hers when she prays. She laughed it off nervously, but her eyes said otherwise. They were wide, glassy, as though she was hoping I'd tell her she wasn't imagining it. I couldn't. Even the children notice. They whisper to each other about the church breathing. They say that if you stay late enough, past the last hymn, when the grown-ups are gone, you can hear the building inhale and exhale, like lungs buried deep inside the walls. Of course, I tell them it's just the wood settling, just the drafts that run through these old beams. But when I'm alone at night, and the air seems to pulse in and out with me, I wonder if they might be right. The woods don't help either. They crowd the church on all sides, thick and unbroken, swallowing the gravel road just a few yards past the property line. In daylight, the trees are quiet, solemn, but at night, they shift. I've stood at the doorway before, staring out into the black line of pines, and I swear I've seen shapes between them, too tall, too still, to be human. Once, I saw eyes, at least, I think they were eyes. Two faint pinpricks of pale light, staring back, unblinking, until I shut the door. The birds go silent too, sometimes, not just at night, but in the middle of the afternoon, when the sun is still high. One moment, the air is alive with their calls, and then, as if someone pressed a button, it all stops. Total silence. No wind, no leaves rustling, nothing. The first time it happened, I thought maybe a hawk had passed overhead, but when I looked up, the sky was clear. No predator, no storm, just silence thick enough to make my ears ring. I know I sound paranoid, but these details build on each other. They stack like bricks until you can't ignore the wall they form, and behind that wall, something is waiting, watching. I feel it when I move through the church alone, at night. My own reflection seems slower, delayed, as if it's considering whether to follow me. Sometimes I'll catch myself in the window, my head turned slightly, my lips moving when mine are not. I blink, and it matches again. But for that brief heartbeat, it feels like I'm not the one in control. There are old rumors too, stories whispered from one generation to the next. Some of the oldest parishioners still talk about a priest who vanished here decades ago. They say he walked into the confessional one night to hear a late confession and never came out. In the morning, the booth was empty. His clothes were folded neatly on the seat, his Bible open, but no trace of him remained. No police report, no official explanation. Just a quiet vanishing. Others say the church was built on land that should never have been blessed. That before the steeple rose, before the altar was hammered together, there was something else here, something older. People avoided the grove, claiming animals refused to graze there. That shadows didn't fall quite right, and when the builders came, they ignored the warnings. They dug, they cut, and maybe they unearthed something that should have stayed buried. It's strange, isn't it? A priest telling you all this. You probably expect me to reassure you, to tell you there's nothing to be afraid of, that faith overcomes darkness. But the truth is, I don't know anymore. Faith doesn't explain why the clocks stop. It doesn't explain why children hear breathing, or why my reflection lingers half a second too long. And it doesn't explain the voice I heard last night. The one that didn't sound like any human being I've ever known. I've been trying to convince myself it's just the building, just my imagination stretched thin by sleepless nights. But there's something I haven't told you yet. Something about that voice. The way it seemed to know me, the way it called me by name. That's when I realized whatever it is that hides in the shadows of this church. It isn't bound to the confessional. It knows me. It's been waiting. And last night, I finally decided to speak. The first night I knew something had shifted was deceptively quiet. I had just finished evening prayers and was sitting in the rectory with a cup of tea when I noticed the clock on the nightstand. Its hands were frozen at 2:14, though I knew it couldn't have been past 10. I leaned back in the chair, rubbed my eyes, and told myself I was simply tired. That's when I heard it. A knock. It wasn't on the door. It wasn't on the walls. It came from beneath me, from the very floorboards I sat on. One knock, then another, then another. The rhythm was deliberate, 3 slow raps, then silence, then 3 again. I froze in place, my tea cooling in my hands, my ears straining for an explanation. Pipes, I thought. Settling beams. But the pattern didn't falter. It was too steady, too purposeful. Eventually, I went to bed, hoping it would fade, but the sound followed me. Always 3 knocks. Always the same cadence, echoing from beneath the mattress, as though something were curled in the darkness below me. I whispered prayers until my throat ached. At some point, the knocking stopped. When I woke the next morning, the crucifix above my bed hung at a crooked angle. The nails were still buried deep in the wood, but the cross itself had been pushed askew, as though something had pressed against it during the night. The following evening, I locked every door in the church and rectory before retiring. I checked each latch twice, running my hand along the bolts, trying to reassure myself. By midnight, I woke to the groan of hinges. The front door of the church stood open, heavy oak swinging wide on its iron frame. A ribbon of cold air bled inside, the gravel path beyond, stretching into the trees. No footprints marked the ground. Nothing had forced its way in. I closed it, bolted it again, and an hour later, heard another set of hinges shriek open. This time, the sacristy door. When I went to check, the room was empty, but every candle inside had been lit. Their flames swayed together, as though stirred by a breath I couldn't see. I didn't sleep that night. The dreams began after. At first, they were only fragments. Shadows moving across the pews. Figures sitting inside the confessional, whispering words I couldn't catch. Then the whispers sharpened, grew clearer. They weren't random. They weren't nonsense. They were messages. One night, I dreamt of a farmer from my parish, Harris, a man who always sat near the back. In the dream, I saw him hunched over a steering wheel, blood rolling down his forehead, lips cracked and trembling as he whispered my name. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The next morning, news came. Harris had been in a terrible car accident. barely surviving. When I visited him in the hospital, his words chilled me. Just before the crash, he said, he'd heard someone whisper my name. Another night, another dream. A woman from the parish, her hands raw from scrubbing, stared into her kitchen sink as water turned black, her lips moving in frantic prayer before she began chanting my name. When I woke, the church's own sink was filled with thick, dark water. I could no longer convince myself these were coincidences. I stopped sleeping, spending my nights awake with the Bible open and candles burning. But the less I slept, the more the church seemed to breathe. The whispers followed me even when my eyes were open. They slid along the walls, drifted from the hollow beneath the floorboards, seeped out of the confessional as if the wood itself exhaled them. I'd sit in silence, and then I'd hear my name, spoken like a secret no one should know, over and over. My name? My name. Objects began to move. First small things. The Bible pushed to the far edge of the table, a chair angled toward the wall. But soon it was larger. One morning I came down to find every pew dragged from its place, arranged in a circle around the confessional, as if waiting for a sermon. No footprints, no scrape marks. Yet the beams had groaned, as though something heavy had shifted them in the night. Each one faced the very booth where I had once heard that voice. Sometimes, when exhaustion broke me, I felt my resolve falter. I would lean back and let the sounds wash over me, the knocking, the whispers, the doors yawning open as though the church itself stretched. It felt like it was wearing me down. That was when I began to feel its presence more directly. One night, as I drifted on the edge of sleep, the mattress dipped beside me. The pressure was slow, steady, undeniable. A weight settled against the bed, pulling the blankets tight across my chest. The air grew cold, so cold I could see my breath mist in the dark. I didn't dare open my eyes, but I could feel it lying there, breathing, silent, patient. When the weight finally lifted, I opened my eyes to find the crucifix above me had been turned upside down. And then came something worse. Late one night, while I sat with only a single candle for company, I heard the creak of the confessional door. What followed wasn't a stranger's whisper. It was my own voice. The tone, the cadence, the very way I draw breath between words, was me. But the words weren't mine. They were questions, low and deliberate. What would you trade for peace? What would you give to make the voices stop? Would you bury a body if it meant salvation? I tried to ignore it. I tried not to respond. But the questions stayed. They gnawed at me. Sometimes I wrote them down, only to burn the page, though the ash never took the words from my mind. I fear that my silence was not silence at all, but a kind of answer. I fear it will hear what I thought. The disturbances grew sharper after that. The knocking came from the walls, the ceiling, the very doors. Hammering beats that chased me through the church until I begged aloud for it to end. And when I begged, it stopped. All sound fled at once, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed into my ears like static. That silence was worse than any noise. Now I dread dusk. The way shadows stretch across the pews. The way the forest presses itself against the windows, as if trying to watch inside. That's when the church breathes loudest. The beams creak in and out, like ribs filling with air. When the exhale comes, the candles shudder, and sometimes, in that trembling flame, I hear words woven into the sigh. They are confessions, sins I once spoke in private, dragged out again in my own voice. Things I had thought long buried. The church isn't just haunted, it is alive. Its walls are lungs, its floorboards, veins, its silence a heartbeat. And each night, it grows bolder, hungrier. I'm not convinced it wants to kill me. At least, not yet. It wants something else. A confession, a surrender, a willing ear. And every night, I feel myself inching closer to giving it what it wants. Sometimes, as I stare at the confessional, I catch myself wondering what would happen if I sat inside once more and answered. Not resisted, not ignored, but answered. What would it do to me then? It was on the fourth night without sleep that I finally broke. I could no longer pretend the noises were tricks of fatigue, nor could I convince myself the church was merely old and creaking with age. Something wanted me to notice. Something wanted me to listen. That night, I stopped resisting and simply let my ears follow the sound. The knocking wasn't random anymore, it guided me, each thud drawing me down the hall, past the altar, and into the sacristy. By the time I reached the back wall, the noise had gone quiet. But in its absence came another sound, softer, like fingernails dragging across wood. I pressed my ear against the paneling and heard it scratching, patient, deliberate. I fumbled for the lantern, and when its light brushed the baseboard, I noticed something I had never seen before. A faint line where the wood didn't quite match the rest of the wall. I pried at it with the poker I kept by the fire. At first nothing gave, but then, with a groan, the board came loose, dust spilling across the stone floor. Behind it was a hollow. My heart stuttered as I leaned in, lantern trembling in my hand. A space no larger than a crawl cavity stretched behind the wall, and inside, wrapped in brittle fabric, lay a bundle. I pulled it out, with shaking fingers. The cloth tore at my touch, revealing what was beneath. A book, or rather, a journal, its cover cracked with age, leather flaking away in strips. I didn't want to open it. Even before I did, I felt the weight of it. Heavy, not just in my hands, but in my chest, as though the words inside already knew me. But my hands disobeyed, flipping the brittle pages, until I saw the scrawl of ink. The handwriting was jagged, erratic, pressed so deeply into the paper it had torn through in places. The first line froze me where I sat. If you are reading this, the church has chosen you too. I read until the words blurred. The writer was a priest, one who had tended this very church long before me, though no records of his name had survived. His entries began with small details, eerily familiar. He wrote of clocks stopping in unison, of whispers rising from the floorboards, of doors opening in the night without cause. Each word echoed my own nights, as though the pages were recounting my life rather than his. But as I read further, the tone shifted. He spoke of being followed in his dreams, of voices that asked questions in his own voice. He wrote of parishioners who had confessed sins that were not their own, who claimed to hear him whisper to them in the dark, long after they'd left the church. And then he wrote of what the church demanded, according to him. The building was not simply haunted, it was a vessel, a kind of cage, but also a mouth. It breathed, it listened, and it remembered. The priest claimed it had been built on ground already tainted, land once marked by rituals not of God, but of something older, something that fed not on blood, but on words, confessions, secrets, the spilling of guilt from one soul into another. He believed that every whispered sin was an offering, every truth a meal. And he feared that once the church had taken enough, it would no longer be content to hold its hunger within. The last entries became near illegible, ink smeared with what looked like water or tears. He begged whoever read his words to resist, to keep silent, to never answer when the church spoke back. He confessed that he himself had failed. He sat in the booth and answered the questions. And though he did not write what he said, his final page was not words, but carvings, scratched into the paper so violently it nearly tore apart. The same phrase repeated again and again, "It knows my name." I closed the book and tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy, pressed against my lungs. The church seemed to listen as I set the journal down, the silence curling tighter around me. And then, faintly, as though from beneath the floor, came a sound I can't describe as anything but laughter. Soft, low, but threaded with recognition. It was not mocking. I was satisfied. That night, the church showed me something more. I had barely drifted when I woke to the lantern still burning at my bedside, though I had sworn I'd extinguished it. Its flame bent, stretching toward the floorboards as though drawn to something below. I leaned down, following its light, and noticed that the seams of the wood were darker than usual, filled with hairline cracks. From those cracks seeped whispers, dozens of voices layered together, confessions overlapping in an endless murmur. Some I recognized parishioners, who had long since passed. Others were strangers, their words sharp with guilt, trembling with shame. And among them was my own voice, reciting scenes I had never spoken aloud. Secrets I had never dared to even think. I covered my ears, but the voices pressed inside anyway, vibrating through bone, worming into thought. The journal's warning rang in my skull. Never answer. I repeated it to myself until my throat went raw. But the church pushed harder. The mattress groaned as though someone climbed onto it, a weight pressing my body into the springs. The candlelight flared, painting shadows across the wall. Those shadows twisted, bent, until they formed words. My name, scrawled again and again, written in darkness. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking with the journal still in my lap and new carvings in the wood by my bedside. They hadn't been there before, of that I'm sure. Lines etched into the grain, desperate and uneven, forming a message I felt in my marrow before I could even read it. We are not trapped with it. It is trapped with us. I wanted to believe it meant hope, but the more I thought about it, the less certain I became. Because if the church was truly a prison, if it was built to cage something ancient and ravenous, then every whispered confession, every secret spoken within its walls, wasn't keeping it locked away. It was feeding it, sustaining it, making it stronger. The journal ended with no resolution, no salvation, only silence. But I know the priest's fate. His name was never recorded in the parish's archives. His grave is nowhere to be found. It's as though the church swallowed him whole, leaving only his desperate warning behind. And now I feel that same erasure crawling toward me. Some nights I dream of walking through town, waving at neighbors, speaking their names, but when they look back at me, their eyes are blank, as though they've never seen me before, as though I'm already being erased, page by page, from the world outside these walls. The revelation wasn't a relief. It wasn't clear. It was confirmation of the thing I had feared all along. The church doesn't simply want my prayers. It doesn't simply want my presence. It wants my voice. It wants the part of me that no one else can hold, the truths I bury, the guilt I keep hidden. It wants to make me confess until there's nothing left inside me but echoes. And I know now, as I sit here whispering this to you, that it won't stop until I give it what it wants. I thought, for a time, that leaving might save me. That if I walked out of that church and never looked back, I could shake off its grip the way you shake off a fever dream, but it doesn't let you go that easily. You see, the first step outside felt like freedom. The air was colder, fresher, the silence of the woods almost clean compared to the thick, listening quiet inside. My boots crunched through frost as I moved toward the tree line. Journal pressed to my chest like it was both a curse and a shield. I didn't even take anything with me. No lantern, no bag, no coat. I only knew I had to move, to put distance between myself and those walls. The forest swallowed me quickly. I thought I knew the path. I had walked it enough times to guide parishioners home after late services, to gather wood, to wander when the sermons felt hollow. But the moment I tried to leave with purpose, the woods turned unfamiliar. The trees loomed taller, closer together, their trunks leaning at angles that seemed wrong. The air itself bent strangely, carrying whispers in the wrong direction. Sometimes the wind came from ahead, sometimes behind, though the trees never moved. And then I noticed the ground beneath me was marked. At first I thought they were deer tracks, small and scattered in the dirt. But the more I looked, the clearer they became. Footsteps, bare, human, pressed deep into the frozen earth. I told myself to follow them, they had to lead somewhere. But after what felt like an hour, they looped back. My own prints were there among them, circling the same oak again and again. The forest wasn't leading me out. It was circling me back. And all the while, I felt eyes between the trees, shifting just beyond sight, watching how long it would take me to notice. I tried to run, but the path doubled under me. My lungs burned, my breath fogging the cold air, and when I stumbled into a clearing, I realized where I was. The church stood there, lanterns glowing faintly in its windows, as though it had been waiting for me to tire myself out. I swore I had walked straight for miles, but here it was, only steps away, and the doors were open. I wanted to keep fighting. I wanted to try again, to sprint into the night, until the forest finally gave way. But my legs trembled, my chest ached, and something in me whispered that the world outside no longer existed. The moment I stepped into those trees, I had left everything familiar behind. The town, the parishioners, the sky itself. All that remained was me and the church. So I went back inside. It was warmer, though not with fire. The air pulsed faintly, as if the walls themselves exhaled. The journal still hung heavy in my hand, but when I tried to set it down on the pulpit, it clung to me, my fingers unwilling to release it. I laughed, softly, bitterly. The sound didn't echo, it was swallowed, and in that silence came the first words spoken aloud by the church itself. My name? Clear, steady, whispered in the same tone my mother once used when she called me in from play as a child. I nearly collapsed at the sound of it, my knees buckling. It wasn't cruel, nor loud, nor monstrous. It was intimate, familiar. I should have resisted. I should have closed my ears and screamed, but exhaustion had thinned me, hollowed me. I answered, just a single word. Yes. The air shifted at once. The walls groaned, the beams creaked, dust sifted from the rafters like falling ash. And then the voices rose. Not from beneath the floor this time, but from the walls, the ceiling, the very stone. 1,000 confessions, layered together, tumbling through me like water through a sieve. I could hear every one, as if they were mine. A woman whispering she had stolen bread for her child. A man weeping that he wished death on his brother. A child sobbing, saying he had broken a toy and lied. They poured into me, filling every hollow space until I felt myself stretched thin beneath the weight of their guilt. And still, beneath them all, was my own voice. Echoing words I had never spoken, sins I had never done. Or perhaps I had. Perhaps the church knew me better than I knew myself. Perhaps it was showing me the truth, peeling away the skin of denial, to reveal the rot beneath. I couldn't tell anymore. I don't remember falling. One moment I stood at the altar, the journal clutched against my chest. The next I was on the floor, staring up at the rafters, where shadows crawled like ink across the beams. They twisted into faces, blurred and shifting, each one mouthing words I couldn't hear. Or maybe they were silent, because they were waiting for me to supply the voice. That's when I understood what the priest's last words meant. We are not trapped with it. It is trapped with us. The church was never a cage to keep us out. It was a cage to keep it in. And the only way it could taste the world beyond its walls was through us, through those of us foolish enough to answer when it whispered. I think I've already given too much now. When I sit in the pews at night, the journal on my lap, I feel the line between me and it thinning. My thoughts sometimes echo back to me in voices not my own. When I dream not of my life, but of the lives of those who confessed before me. Their regrets feel like mine. Their sorrows stick to me, as if I've lived them. And when I wake, I can't always separate them. The boundary dissolves a little more each night. Maybe you wonder why I'm still here. Why don't I try again to run, to burn the church to the ground, to end it? But the truth is, I don't think fire would touch it. I don't think distance would matter. I think once you answer, once you acknowledge it, you belong to it. The outside world no longer wants you. Only the church does, so I stayed. Some nights I think of walking out the doors and trying one last time, just to see if the trees will let me through. Other nights, I sit quietly and let it speak, and I find comfort in the familiarity of the voices. It is lonely, yes, but not entirely. There's always someone whispering, always someone confessing. Even if it's only me. I don't know if that's escape or descent. Maybe it's both. Maybe there's no difference anymore. But I do know this. When the church finally calls your name, you won't be able to ignore it either. And when you answer, even if it's just one word, it will sound exactly like you've known that voice your whole life. I haven't really slept since that night. Not the way people are supposed to sleep. My eyes close, yes, and hours pass, but rest never comes. Dreams bleed into waking, and waking bleeds into dreams. Sometimes I lie there for what feels like minutes, only to discover the sun has already shifted, shadows stretched in ways I never noticed. Other times, I think I've slept the whole night through. But when I check the clock, it insists only 15 minutes have passed. Time doesn't move the same way for me anymore. It bends, it folds, it splinters. Just like the forest did when I tried to leave, and the sound I still hear every night. The whispering, not from behind walls now, but from inside me. It curls up at the back of my mind the way a song does when you can't stop humming it under your breath. Except these are not songs. They're voices, confessions, little fragments of strangers' guilt and grief, spilling out like broken records. Some nights, I can almost convince myself it's nothing, just the brain firing off static after too many sleepless nights. But then one of the voices says something I shouldn't know. A detail about a life I never lived. A sin I never committed. And for just a moment, I remember the feeling of standing in that church, surrounded by 1,000 unseen mouths. You asked me once why I'm telling you this. I think I know now. It's not just for me, it's for you. You seem like someone who has seen strange things too. Someone who understands that silence isn't always empty, that the dark sometimes listens back. I needed you to hear it, to know what waits out there in the woods. Because I don't think I'm the last. I think it's still calling, even now. Reaching out for someone new, but promise me you won't try to find it. Please, don't go looking for the old road, the one the maps don't mark anymore. Don't wander too far past the tree line when you're hiking or chasing the quiet. Don't follow any sound that calls your name in a voice that feels too familiar, because once you answer, you'll never come back the same. The church doesn't want visitors, it wants vessels, and when it finds you, it will not let go. I used to believe, once, that places were just wood and stone, nothing more. That evil lived in men, not in buildings. But I was wrong. That place breathes. It remembers, it feeds, and it doesn't die, no matter how much we wish it would. I've thought often about fire, about torching the walls, until only ash remains. But ash is still a kind of seed, isn't it? It drifts on the wind. It settles. It waits. And the church has been waiting a very long time. Sometimes, when I'm weak enough, I think about giving in. About stopping the fight, letting the voices fill me until there's nothing left of who I was. I wonder if that would bring peace, if maybe that's what happened to the ones who came before. Maybe the priest, the congregation, the countless names carved into the pews, maybe they just stopped resisting. Maybe that's why the church still hums with their presence. It isn't haunted, it's inhabited. But then I remember you. I remember the fact that you're listening. That someone out there still lives outside its reach, and it gives me just enough strength to keep talking, to hold on a little longer. Maybe that's all I can do now. Warn, confess. Whisper my story into the night, and hope the words drift farther than the walls around me. I hope they reach ears that can still walk away. If you ever find that place, if by some cruel chance your path bends the way mine did, and you come across that leaning steeple in the clearing, don't go inside. Don't even pause to stare. Turn back. Run. Forget you saw it. Burn it if you have the means, though I can't promise it will matter. Just don't stay. never stay. Because the longer you linger, the more it learns you, the more it takes. And once it has your name, it will never stop calling. I'm not the same man I was when I first told you this story. Maybe you can hear it in my voice, how thin it's gotten, how tired. Or maybe you can't. Maybe to you I still sound like the same person. But I know the truth. I feel the edges of myself fraying. My thoughts sometimes not entirely my own. I am less me, and more something else. Something borrowed. Something being hollowed out to make room. So if this is the last time you hear me, if one night my voice fades and you find only silence in its place, know that I tried. Know that I fought. And know that I told you, because someone had to. Because the church is still waiting. And someday it may call your name too. And when it does, I pray you'll remember what I've said. Before I go, I need to ask you something. Have you ever heard a voice that wasn't supposed to be there? Maybe it came late at night, when you were half asleep, and you told yourself it was nothing. Or maybe it came when you were alone in your house, certain every door was locked, every window shut. A whisper, soft enough that you thought you imagined it, but not so soft that you could ignore it. If you've heard it, then you know. You know how hard it is to sleep afterward. You know how quickly the silence turns into a trap. How the dark feels thicker, heavier, almost like it's leaning closer. Tell me if it's happened to you. Share your story and your confession down below. I read every single one. Sometimes, the voices that follow me grow quieter when I see I'm not the only one who's lived with them. Maybe that'll help you too. Maybe writing it down will keep them from getting any closer. But be careful. Don't speak their words out loud. Don't repeat what you hear in the dark. Just write. Whisper it in text where they can't crawl out as easily. And if you're thinking of listening to another story after this one, just don't do it alone.